In this video, we will create our first orbit library and examine each of the components of the orbit editor. Start Unity and open your dedicated orbit project. As explained in the previous video, we recommend having one dedicated Unity project for all your orbit projects. Before we continue, we need to take a look at the data types used by Orbit. Orbit uses a simple nested structure for all its data types. An orbit network is the data type that you use to create an adaptive element in your game. Orbit networks contain orbit skills, which represent the variables used by Orbit to adapt game behavior. More information on orbit networks and skills can be found in the tutorial video, Creating an Orbit Network. Orbit networks are stored in an orbit library. Orbit libraries can contain any number of orbit networks. This means that if you want several adaptive elements in your game, they can all be stored in one orbit library. To use an orbit library in a game, you must build the library, as we will see in the tutorial Using Orbit in a Game. So, in order to start using Orbit, we have to create an orbit library. To create an orbit library, click Create and then click Create Orbit Skill Library. Name the orbit library. Use a logical name, such as Orbit Tutorial Library, to help with your organization. Click Create New Skill Library. This will create a new file in the Libraries folder with the same name as your orbit library. This file is how Orbit saves your library to disk. Creating a new library has also opened 3 new editor windows in your Unity project. Let's start with the window called Library Explorer. The Library Explorer allows you to explore the networks inside an orbit library. Currently, this library is empty, so it just displays the name of the library. The Library Explorer is used to create, duplicate, and delete orbit networks and skills, as we'll see in the tutorial, Creating an Orbit Network. Dock the Library Explorer and focus the Network Editor. The Network Editor provides a graphical user interface for designing orbit networks. The Network Editor allows you to create new orbit skills and orbit groups, a feature that is properly introduced in the tutorial Training Orbit to Adapt Game Behavior or AI. At the moment, the Network Editor is empty, as there are no networks in this library. Dock the Network Editor, then focus and dock the Orbit Trainer. The Orbit Trainer is the interface that trains Orbit to adapt game behavior. Orbit adapts game behavior by using classifications. Using the Orbit Trainer, you teach Orbit how different levels of orbit skills correspond to different classifications. We examine the Orbit Trainer in greater detail in the tutorial Training Orbit to Adapt Game Behavior or AI. We have now seen all the components of the Orbit Editor: the Library Explorer, the Network Editor, and the Orbit Trainer. In the next tutorial, we will be discussing how to design adaptive elements in games and how this design process is implemented in coAdjoint Orbit.